My clock says T-2, so we'll be punctual rather than early. So please continue to talk amongst yourselves. All right, I have 10:30 on my clock, so we're going to get started here. My name's Deb Quentel. I work here at Chicago, Kent for CALI, the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction. In case you're wondering whose conference you're at, welcome. If this is your first conference, a special welcome to you. Let me tell you a little bit about what I do at CALI. First of all, my title is very long. I have to use the wide landscape version of the business card. The general counsel stuff, we can all imagine the mystery and excitement I have day to day. That part of my job. The Director of Curriculum Development, come on in and have a seat. The Director of Curriculum Development means I do a variety of things. As I described to someone this morning, I split my time about 75% working with authors, fellows, faculty, and then 75% is working with Elaine Dell. So if you work with me, that's all I'm constantly behind, and I appreciate your patience as always. So let me tell you why I'm doing this topic on distance education. First of all, I'm passionate about it. It's something that we have been working on indirectly with CALI. Every time we create a lesson, it is in effect giving students education at a distance. They're not in the same room or space as their faculty member. I've taken a number of courses online. I counted up the other day, I've actually taken 10 courses online. 4 of them have been at the graduate or undergraduate level, and then 6 have been part of a certificate that I earned a number of years ago. It was a certificate in online teaching. So I've been thinking about teaching online for quite a while. Some of the classes that I've taken online have been absolutely fantastic. I'm eager to run home, get to my laptop, log in, see what my classmates are doing. I have my favorite classmates and my other classmates. And some of the courses have been so hideous that by week 2, I've opened a Google document where I'm starting basically my manifesto on why I hate the class and why I'm not learning anything. And sometimes I find by week 14 that the manifesto has in effect taught me how to teach or how to do something. Whether I'm learning the subject matter is another story, but I've always sort of got an eye open for how am I learning and what am I learning in addition to the substantive material. I'm also interested in technology and teaching. I taught a blended course a number of years ago here at Chicago Kent as an adjunct. That was a fabulous experience, and I read and think about a lot of this topic. So before we get started, by a round of applause, how many of you work at a law school? Just let's get a baseline. All right, assuming that is everyone. How many of you currently, by a round of applause, have some sort of current distance education course at your school? I think my ear says that's a little bit less. All right, and we'll see what our viewing audience says later. So this is a start of a dialogue. I'm hoping that we have time for discussion at the end. Sunday morning after lunch, I have a late lunch on Sundays, I started running through my presentation. I stopped around 7 p.m. I wasn't quite finished with it. So you're getting the abbreviated version of what started as a very, very long, perhaps, conference in itself, as you can all imagine. So let's move on. Oops. All right, so here's what I'm covering and skipping, sort of to give us some ideas. I'm not going to be covering things in the flipped classroom world because there's so many other sessions here at the conference that cover flipped classrooms. So I'm going to turn discreetly aside for a minute if you'd like to flee the room because you really wanted to hear about flipped classrooms. All right, so you're here then. We're going to be covering distance education, which is a broad theme, obviously. Very quickly over the ABA themes, because I think if you understand, if you're here, you know about the ABA standards. And then talking a lot about actually creating an online course and thinking about teaching pedagogy. And then hopefully some room for online. So distance education, as I'm thinking about it, is defined as synchronous or asynchronous. And it's teaching and planned learning in which teaching normally occurs in a different place from learning, requiring communication through technologies as well as special institutional organization. There are a lot of words there that, look, we've been graced by the speed racer fair.
Quiet, don't interrupt.
So we're talking about education, we're talking about teaching and learning, which are two distinct things. We're talking about planned learning, which to me suggests the teacher is there to help the student learn. We're talking about faculty members who are not off on their own. This is not a renegade faculty member left to be off on their own and everyone else is, oh, that's really interesting. Huh, okay, you tell me how that works. And communication is required. And communication is a two-way street. It suggests activity. It does not, to me, suggest a push technology. It's not passive watching. I watched a video recently of Michael Phelps winning one of his gold medals. I don't think I learned how to be a world-class swimmer by that. But it was a fun video to watch. All right, so the ABA, we all know Standard 306, I'm sure. This is just a reminder of what we're talking about. And they also go on to talk about awarding credits. It's interesting to keep in mind, we're talking about JD programs within the law school environment, not the LL.M programs. LL.M programs are not accredited by the ABA, which means, as I read it, you're outside the online guidelines for an LL.M program. So should your law school move toward an online JD class? We talked about the ABA standards. We've got a couple things going on here that are three problems as I see it that could cause introducing distance education to be troublesome for any institution. First of all, there's the academic culture of teaching. The academic culture that most of us exist in views teaching as an individual act in a classroom, a very strong sense of academic freedom for what you're doing in your classroom. In the law school environment, we generally do not have people who come in annually and review our teaching. That may, as I understand it, happen only if you're up for tenure or some sort of promotion. Second, that's what I call the way we were philosophy. And it's a policy-making structure dominated by administrators, faculty, and staff who are satisfied with a system that gave them power. Perhaps I'm a little dark for 10:30 in the morning. But there is a sense of tradition. Why should we change it? It's worked for me. I'm just not comfortable with it. And finally, we do it differently here in our department, our building, our part of campus. And the problem here is an administrative system that exists on the broader university campus, of which your law school might be a part of, in which technological and human resources are fragmented in a multi-layer structure of faculty and departments, each with its own guard and its own interest. Which means if your institution has 42 webmasters, that could be a sign that there's some layering going on, who's in charge. If your school is running 42,000 different websites that all sputter off of the main website, just look around and say, how many people are making decisions of how things are going to be done with technology? There has to be a little bit of uniformity for a distance ed class to really pull together successfully. And if the law school is duplicating main campus and there's no sharing, ask yourself why not? Can you benefit from the education of others? So, assuming you overcome those three problems, or you don't have them at all, should your law school move any or more JD classes online? If everyone jumped off the Empire State Building, a sentence I'm sure we've all heard growing up as children, it's applicable here actually, because you don't just want to put your courses online because you can. You don't want to put your courses online because the school down the street in your same zip code is putting courses online. It should be an individually, school-by-school decision. Your administration has to be behind this decision. Again, this goes to the one faculty member who's trying this on their own. They're going to face a lot of challenges. So is your administration behind it? And what does that mean? Are they going to support the faculty member? Are they going to support the IT and development staff necessary to create a distance ed course? There is a definite up curve of work. Every department in your school will be impacted. This is not something that's happening in room 510 at 7 p.m. on Thursdays by that one professor you've never quite caught their name, but they run fast through the hall and they sure have a nice pair of shoes. IT needs to think about support during non-traditional hours. If you have students logging in 24/7, is your school willing to support the IT to support those students? For non-JD programs, and in this case I refer to the Masters of Law programs that are turning up in various areas, for folks who have a bachelor's degree, perhaps in health law or in health, and they're working in a hospital, and the school decides to offer some sort of Master of Law in health for non-JD candidates. How is the school going to support you there? The faculty need to be released from committee. I didn't see the smiles I was expecting from them. The faculty need to be released from committees because they're going to be spending a lot more extra time developing the course. You have to ask, are faculty actually interested in teaching online? If as the administration at the school, as the dean, you're going to pull a name out of a hat and assign that person the online course for the semester, I'm pretty certain it's going to be a miserable experience for the students and the faculty member and anyone else who comes in the vortex of that exciting experience. Everyone needs to be interested in teaching. At the college level, where I've read a number of studies, they show that the lack of motivation on the faculty part influences students in the online program. And that in turn heavily impacts your student retention. So if you are concerned with student retention and students transferring, consider how motivated your faculty are and how enjoyable the program is for everyone. If you have an empty seat near you, would you wildly wave your hand to welcome these people? Isn't that nice to see friends waving at you? Who's going to own the course? That's actually a session on its own. Yeah, at least. John and I talk about this all the time. We don't have an answer, but your school definitely needs to think about this. You need to think about it well before the class launches, well before everyone is involved. This is a very big decision. It's kind of like deciding the name of your school and then opening it up. You don't want to do it the flip way. And then think about, why are you moving these courses online? Are you providing courses for students who are working away from campus at some sort of internship? Are you accommodating a faculty member who is visiting elsewhere but is committed to teaching a particular course back to their home students? Are you accommodating a faculty member who wants to be in Florida, Jamaica, Wyoming, Minnesota? Insert your season or school name there. Are you accommodating a faculty member who's been asked to speak at a number of key conferences and looks at their schedule and realizes they're going to be missing 50% of the face-to-face class time? Is it a clinical professor who's involved in a large case and won't be there for their substantive course as well? Is it the ability to control time and space for your students so that they can take more classes in a decreasing physical space size that you may have in the building? Or is it the ability to co-teach with an expert in the subject area who just can't get into your classroom due to time and travel? It's also going to allow you to innovate the teaching experience, and this is something you want to consider. So let's jump into how we actually do this. There are a number of things you have to do. It starts with planning, and this, I almost feel like this should be that real estate line where you go location, location, location. I want to stand here and chant planning, 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 because planning is very important here. So you have to think of what's the content actually in the course. And unlike some courses that you might teach face-to-face, where the joke sometimes in the hallway is, I'm 3 or 4 courses ahead of my student, you probably want to have the entire course constructed before you start to run it. And if you think of what that entails, that's a lot of work for a lot of people. So you want to think of what content is going to be included and what's going to be left out. You want to bring in your faculty for this portion. And you might have heard me say you're bringing in the faculty. You might be thinking, well, why isn't the faculty member doing this whole thing? And I will get to that. So how is this material going to be sequenced and structured? Likely you're working with a professor who has taught this course before, and they may have some very strong ideas about constructing the course. What media will you be using to present this different blocks of material? Is it going to be video? Is it going to be a talking head video? Is it going to be PowerPoint with audio over it? Is it going to be podcast, PowerPoint, photo story? How are you going to present this as media? Just old plain fashioned text. What teaching strategies will you use? How much interaction will there be between students and the professor, and then between students with each other? How will the learning be evaluated, and what form will feedback do students take? And I'm speaking here of evaluation beyond the final exam. I'm speaking of evaluation that's going on throughout the course, which is a little different than the way we do a traditional law school course, although things are changing. There's evaluation throughout the semester now. In a classroom, you can scan the room, and you can see people who are giving up, sleeping in their chair. You can see on the smirk on their face, they're most likely not with you. You hope they're with Facebook, or maybe they just really love the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. They can't help but smile when they read diversity. You pick up a lot of nonverbal cues that are completely lost in the environment of distance education. So think about how you're going to be evaluating and providing feedback. And then finally, how are you going to create the materials? What production methods will be used to create the materials? So let's talk about implementing a planning process. There are a couple different tools that instructional designers use. One is called an ADDIE model. It stands for the 5 elements listed on the screen. Analysis is someone has to identify the performance that would suggest mastery of the subject and identify the content to include. In the design phase, your learning objectives are stated in very specific terms. Learning objectives is not something that all the faculty at your school might be considering already in their course. So this might be sort of new for them and exciting. A learning objective generally consists of what's defined as a behavior, the conditions under which it should be evaluated, and a measurement tool for figuring out, did they get it? Some folks use Bloom's hierarchy of 6 levels of objectives in the cognitive domain. and some use Gagne's classification of learning objectives. What you want to do is see, for example, if a larger goal is for students to understand duration in copyright law, can we break that into specific learning objectives? And for each objective, you then have to decide what can be achieved by reading something, such as a statute or the casebook, what can be achieved by viewing something, such as a video or a PowerPoint, what can be achieved by practice. For example, the students pair up online and work with each other on a project. And then testing and feedback has to be designed to ensure that students eventually can perform some sort of task that's associated with each objective. So in the design phase, it's really a very large process, and you're looking at the course from the macro level. It's going to be 14 weeks, to the micro and the smallest. What am I going to do in each module? In the development phase, the designers and producers create the instructional materials for what is needed for achieving the different learning objectives. And the designers should be working with faculty. So already I'm suggesting there's more than a faculty member on their own. The implementation phase. Here we see that the course is rolled out to the students, and the students are actually interacting with the professor and other students as the material dictates. And finally, the evaluation. And this is a bit of a circle that's just running through the entire course. And you're doing formative, ongoing assessment, unit by unit, to see how units are working effectively. That allows you to fine-tune things. Right now, the traditional model is at the end of the semester, you look at the exam and sort of get a sense, oh, perhaps there was a bit of misunderstanding globally through the class on this concept. And then the next semester, you bump up the coverage there. Or if you have a number of students who come in and visit you in your office hours, you have a sense that there's a concept problem there. So when we implement it, we take the analysis phase, for example, and we look at all these elements that break down into further, smaller aspects. So I took, for example, for fun, because I love to spend my Saturday evenings doing fun things like this for CALI, and I took the analysis phase, and I took a copyright course that I might teach, and I stepped through, if I was teaching a copyright law course, and I was in this analysis phase of what exactly would I do. So I said, all right, my design is that the course is going to be covering copyright. And it's a typical upper level course offered in the law school world. It's also offered for LL.Ms in the IP world. And I thought about who I would involve in designing the course with me playing the role of the subject matter expert. And so I might bring in an instructional designer, I might bring in the school's IT people, I might bring in guest speakers, who are all the people involved. So then I started thinking, who's my audience? Well, my audience is pretty well defined in this world. It's law students. They all have a baseline of understanding of things. What do they already know? Well, they already know probably how to analyze and read cases. What are all the skills that I don't have to teach them that they learned in first year? And I also think through, why do I need this course? What's my purpose? Well, my purpose is to create attorneys who can go out and practice and work with clients in this area. And then I would list out all the areas and think, how do those apply into the areas I'm teaching? And I might want to define also what sort of learning needs to happen here. So at the end of the semester, the students, I would want them to be able to look at anything that's covered by the Copyright Act. So any of the arts and books and things like that, and determine whether it's entitled to protection, and determine how long the protection is going to last, determine how to represent a client in registering it, understand licenses. I'm basically just thinking, what do I want my students to learn and be able to do if a client walks in on week 15, assuming I have a third year and they pass the bar, what should the student be able to do? So then I say, what's my goal? And again, I'm going to set some specific goals for this class. Maybe I want the students to write a client letter telling their client why it's really best not to rip stuff off the internet and put it on t-shirts and sell it. Oops. And I want to think about how can I engage the students with working with each other. Maybe I'm going to create some sort of simulation and have them negotiate a license with each other. Maybe I'm going to have them play the role of client. Maybe I'll bring in some attorneys from town who play the role of client with problems. What am I going to set as the goals? Then what are the objectives? What do I want students to be able to do at the end of the semester? Then I come to identifying content. And this might be content that I have created over the years. Maybe I've written a number of lectures that I give or presentations. Maybe I have PowerPoint slides I can use. What can I use that I've already created, and what do I need more, and what do I need new? Are there videos that I can create? Are there photo stories I can create? PowerPoint slides? This is the most fun part actually. You want to just let your imagination go wild and think, what are all the ways that I can present this material to students, recognizing students learn in different ways. Then I have to think, what do I have and what needs to be created? And this is why you need to start very early with this, because it takes long to create anything, as we know. Then when I get to the instruction phase, which was the last of my analysis design phase there are a couple of folks who have looked at all the learning theory out there and said, we see a lot of things in common. Here's what works really well. And one of these folks is David Merrill, who's created what he calls his first principles of instruction. And what he does is he divides it into basically 5 things that you should have in every program. And there should be less emphasis on merely conveying information using technology, but more emphasis on how to make the instruction effective, efficient, and engaging. And this goes to the, we have a really cool webcam that takes your face and morphs it into a Monet painting, so let's do that. That's fabulous. If you can also engage some sort of learning objective with it and be using it as a pedagogical tool rather than just, oh look, I look like Monet now. So in the demonstration, move ahead. So what I want to do here is, in a problem, let me back up a second. So I'm reflecting on my larger class of copyright law. And I looked at one module within copyright law. What is one thing that I would want to teach the students? And I would want to teach them about public domain. And so I want to set the stage for the problem, and I want to define the problem. I want to pull the student in. And this is what you do when you walk into the classroom, and your opening couple sentences are telling them why you are so passionate about this material and why this next 50 minutes is going to be really knock your socks off exciting. So I like to set the stage and say, well, here's what's going on with copyright and define it. And then I want to determine what the task is. So our task is defining whether something is in the public domain under U.S. copyright law. That is my goal. That's the buoy that I swim toward. So the next step is called activation. And this is where you pull in for students other things that they may have used in their life, other learning they know, where they can relate this. So you can, these students, you can ask, have you ever posted to a blog? Have you ever put a photo up on Facebook? It's basically saying, have you ever lived your life? And then you have to ask them, are you violating others' rights, or are they violating your rights? Usually students get really excited about the sense that someone might be violating their right. That seems to be a side of the equation that's very popular. So you're grabbing the attention. This is the opening 5 minutes, in a way, of the TV show where you decide, oh, I will stay on this channel. It's so captivating. So then in the demonstration phase, we're going to show students how to figure out whether something is in the public domain. So maybe some of these content, this content that I have created so far, maybe a photo story or a video, that I have found on YouTube, maybe I'm going to walk students through that. I'm going to provide that material for them to see how others think about public domain, how others define it. So I'm asking the students, is this the material that's the subject of U.S. copyright law? If it's a yes-no decision, and then they decide who is the author of the work. If it's someone you know, you just go get permission, things like that. And then we have to look at when was the work created. So these were all these stages that I'm walking the students through PowerPoint or a talking head video or some sort of material that I have created. So now that I've walked the students through how I would do it, I would like them to try it. And when I bring in, so I might bring in an expert in the field to oversee them. I might oversee all of their work, and I will divide the students up and give them hypothetical simulated clients and problems and see how they all pull this together. And then finally, in the final stage, I might have the students report back on how they found the experience. I might have them report back on problems they encountered. I might have them report back on a checklist that they might have for dealing with this problem in the future. Another way to look at this problem is through Gagne's 9 events of instruction. And for those of you who are my CALI authors in the room, a big shout out to y'all, hello. You all recognize this because we have taken a man's entire study for his entire life, which by the way is basically what I'm doing with this whole presentation, taking entire lives of information and putting them onto a single slide that we're going to blast through in this hour of time together. So we always talk about Gagne and the 9 events of instruction in creating CALI lessons, because CALI lessons are in effect a form of distance education. It's learning where the faculty member is not hovering nearby. So a lot of times you can use the planning process, Gagne, for the planning process. So one of the projects that I have my student law clerks do every time they work for me is acquire permission for images that are inside CALI lessons that come from third parties. And this is a skill that I have to teach every new law student that comes and works for me. So I kind of have it down to a system, knock on wood, that I use from time to time now. So here's what I basically do. First of all, I gain the students' attention. I tell them that I come from a family of long-living people. My law license is very important to me, and if they mess up, I will come after them, and they can basically support me for the rest of my natural life. And then I smile. So that I usually have their attention at that point. And the next thing I do is I tell them about the objectives. I tell them how the images work in the lesson, and I tell them what we're going to do, that we're going to determine the source or vendor. Well, that's always been provided by the author, thank you very much. Then we have an email that we send out to the vendors. I provide them with that information. And I step them through all the stages that they're going to be using to determine whether, to send out the information to request permission for this image. Then I'm going to remind students that they worked through CALI lessons, haven't they? Yes. Well, remember all the other images in the lessons? Yes. Well, all of those have been cleared by other people before you, so this job really isn't that hard. You're doing the same thing. And by the way, this is kind of like actual work. So doing under supervision, so it's kind of fun. So then I give the student the actual content to work with. I give them the directions to complete the project, and then I share with them an example, which is learning guidance. I share with them an example of a completed image permission. The next thing I do is I ask them to complete one on their own. And why don't you just send it to me first off, because I can't seem to find the right email right now. All right? And they send it to me for critique. So they're having a chance to practice on it. I respond to them with some feedback of things that we may or may not want to include in the email. And then I send it back to them to send out to the third-party vendor. I remind them that they're going to be expecting a reply from the third-party vendor and to follow up on that. And then I assess their performance based on a Google Doc where I track things, because I use Google Doc to track every single thing that happens in my life. So the Google Doc is a way that I can constantly be giving the student feedback. Are they marking off what's going on? And then finally, to enhance their retention of this project and be able to transfer it to their actual jobs, they can go out and work on acquiring permissions and licensing from third-party vendors. I allow them to update the Google Doc that they just use to learn how to do this. So it's kind of like every student who comes through our office walks up to this big old brick wall we have at CALI's headquarters, and they spray paint their name on it. And over time, I can't tell who's written what comments anymore, but they get to clarify the comments that they find unclear, and they get to add on their own ideas of how to make this project better. And they actually do learn, and I can pretty much turn them loose with minimal supervision to engage in this sort of activity. So it's a pretty neat system. So who does all this planning and development? Well, I talked before about this single faculty member who's out there. That's going to be a really, really hard way to do it if you've got one faculty member who's doing all of this. And I'm sure every school's got one faculty member who is really eager to do this on their own, and that's fantastic. The usual method of one faculty member allows you for a very quick change when there's a change in the law, but a more popular method is an author-editor, two people working. The faculty member is the author, and then you've got someone helping to put the material into technology, excuse me, and to create learning modules. Perhaps that person has instructional design experience and can help the faculty member create the proper assessment and feedback for students. The really cool way to do it is if you have a whole team of people. And that's the subject matter expert working with a number of folks from around campus. And you usually need a project manager to make sure everyone is on track. And it's just a lot of fun to do it this way because you're sharing ideas and you're building an entire course with everyone bringing in their expertise and their viewpoint. And it's the way CALI lessons are actually written. The fellowship works where we pull 5 people together. Everyone individually writes lessons. Then I review everything. The authors revise lessons. They share it among their other fellows. It comes back to me. I send it out for editorial board review. Then it goes back to the author. And then finally, it goes up on the website. So it's a very exciting way to work, actually. So let's talk money, because money always raises its head. So 35 minutes into our conversation, let's talk money. An author-editor model is going to be fast and cheap. A team is going to be expensive. More people, more money. It's going to generally take more time, but you're going to end up with a stronger course. And there are more people to add to the check and balance. Whoops. So I don't think video alone is going to satisfy the ABA standard 306. Video lacks a number of things. Recently, a friend of mine did learn how to install a replacement sump pump using 2 YouTube videos during a thunderstorm. I was very impressed. But we're not really teaching that sort of skills in our law school classes. So we need to engage the students. We need to still be present. You can't videotape the professor in fall semester and play the videos live in spring and call it a course, in my opinion. Video is great for capturing a class where the students might miss because of holidays, travel, inclement weather. We saw an uptick in the use of ClassCaster a couple years ago with some of those massive storms, winter storms that blew through the Northeast. And folks say, but look at Khan Academy, it's all video. Isn't that really cool? Yes, it is really cool. And those were originally designed for his cousins who were also in school. And this was a supplement to their material. And even teachers in the K through 12 level who are using the Khan Academy videos in their flipped classroom, it's a flipped classroom. There's still something going on in the classroom. Even folks who use the Khan Academy for homeschoolers, they've got experts also working with their kids. So I think we can presume that it's a supplement to learning. So early distance education was based on an instructivist approach, and we're seeing that constructivism is becoming more the norm these days. It's probably the sweet spot where we want to work with our students to create learner-centered and collaborative materials for the students. Oops. So there's this idea in distance education of transactional distance. And it's influenced by two things, actually three, depending on who you read: dialogue, structure, and the autonomy of the learner. And the distance is not a time and space sort of continuum of, oh, well, I'm in Montana and all my students are working in the state of Washington. It's not that sort of distance sort of thing. It's a measurement of more or less. And distance education, because it's a subset of educational events, it has distinct organizational forms and teaching behaviors. And teaching behavior here, of course, I refer to ways of presenting the material. So dialogue is defined as the interaction or series of interactions having positive qualities that other interactions might not have. A dialogue is purposeful, constructive, and valued by both parties. Remember, valued by both parties. So you as the teacher need to be getting something, and the student needs to be getting something. We're talking here about dialogue between faculty and student, and of course the size of the group matters. You cannot expect a distance ed professor to teach the same large number of students as in a physical classroom. The demands of the interaction with the students is going to be greater. You need to crank down the size of the classroom so that these demands of time can be adequately addressed. Structure refers to the style of dialogue. Email, for example, is highly structured, and in contrast, chat mode is less structured. So why do we care about transactional distance? Basically, the greater the transactional distance, the more learner responsibility is required. There are a couple different types of transactional interactions. You can have student to content, student to professor, and student to student. A fourth style is raised because of technology, and that's students to the interface. That's students working through the CALI lesson, for example. And further research shows that really, if you have one of these as a deep, meaningful interaction, you can probably skimp on the others, and it's not going to be a great disaster. But you need something here. When you look at this, you think the professor is involved or the student is involved. And that suggests to me it's not just video. It has to be more. So you have to think about how are you going to design student participation. Are you going to use threaded email? You have to have some level of participation. It has to be engineered to require students to contribute. What I found worked really well when I used a blended classroom is I posted what was meant to be a provocative statement each week, and students had to respond to it and then respond to two other students' response to my response. So it's a layering. It forces the student to engage with you and to engage with their classmates. And it really involves them in the learning. What else is going to work? Well, video to me suggests sage on the stage, which is something we're all very comfortable with. It's what we do all the time. And a video has a pause button though. And yet we're culturally accustomed to the forward motion of frame after frame. And you might want to think about telling the students to pause the video. Consider a point and then come back to the video. Watching a faculty member in a video is not the same as watching a TV show. And we don't want our students to get confused and think that it's just a passive sitting there with the information being pushed at them. So I often wonder if you could use the video to mimic a lecture, rather it does mimic a lecture, but can you use it to mimic a Socratic dialogue? by engaging the students. And if it does mimic a lecture alone, if you've read Donald Bly's book, What's the Use of Lectures, you know that there are absolute limits to the lecture format. So would students benefit from the use of two speakers? The neat thing about two speakers on a video is it gives a sense of Roger and Ebert sort of back and forth. One of you can decide, oh, I'll be the bad professor this time and bring up all the difficult arguments. Or you can question each other in ways that you know your students would in class, but they're afraid to. It also gives for more interesting dialogue for yourself. It's very hard to stand in front of a camera and just talk, but if you have someone to bounce ideas back and look forth with, it works really well. And then there's this Chinese proverb that says, tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand. And that seems really applicable to creating teaching materials that work for students. So you definitely want to be involving the students. Sometimes a video is perfect. It's a single class. A guest speaker that you know, you run into at a conference, they've just written an amazing article or they've handled an exciting case, but they cannot get into your classroom. It's a great time for a video. And then TED Talks, they're really interesting. This is actually a slide that I was watching from Saul Khan was talking about the whole program of Khan Academy. And he drew this picture on his slide, and then he said, if this doesn't blow your mind, you have no emotion. And I paused, because my math is not high enough, so I have no emotion, just for the record. But I loved his passion. He just came alive on the TED Talk stage when he said that. And he looked out at the audience, and a few people were like, oh, yeah. And the rest were like, oh, I'm an emotionless fool. So there are a lot of tools that you can use to build these. If you have a learning management system at your school that's already being used by main campus, go take those people to coffee. Take them to lunch. They are your new best friends. Use that system. There are people at the school or at the university who have already tried this and have succeeded and who have already failed. You want to talk to the people who have failed, hand them tissue, and get them to tell you the really bad parts. What went wrong, build your class differently. We've got some tools at CALI, of course, that work. Classcaster is used a lot. A lot of folks are using it for podcasting, video. If you have to build your own, think of what the privacy settings on a lot of this open source thing is. I've seen some very, what I find scary, K through 12 use of all these open source tools where kids' material is just out there on the internet for anyone to find and read. And I just find that just a little creepy. Think about whether you can want a wiki, which allows for a group use of a document, whether you want to do some sort of blogging, whether you want to use shared Google Docs, run an email, Photo Story. Photo Story is my new favorite tool. If you have anyone familiar with Photo Story, it's really, you feel like an Oscar director in 10 minutes. You drop photos in, and then it plays the photos in the sequence you organize them, and you record a lecture over it, and then you put their background music in. And I've created a number of documentaries about my pets, which I am told by my mother are stunning. It's a lot of fun, and if you use it for an actual substantive area, you can bring in a lot of things. I think what are courses where you want to bring stuff in? I lurk on the IP professor list, and they're always looking for IP videos of infringing copyright or in trademark law, the fake Rolex watch, things like that. So anything you can put in. Don't forget to include CALI lessons. I, for some reason, forgot to include it on my slide. So learn from my mistakes. I don't know how. And lastly, I want to move to a brief discussion here about LLMs. This is an area where I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm pretty captivated by this. So, round of applause. How many of you offer an LLM program at your school? All right, great. Now, round of applause. How many of you offer that program online? Far fewer. This is really interesting to me. All right, so let's look at our hypothetical law school. Basically, I just took a static enrollment of faculty. I guess you're not enrolled, you would be hired or employed. A static employed of faculty here. And then I took some of the articles about different law schools that have declining admission. And I built my blue line based on a lot of different law schools. But the theme here is pretty much the same. Your 1L enrollment is going down. Your faculty numbers are staying the same. What else is staying the same at your school? Your building is the same size. Your library, your tenured staff, any money that you have to share over to main campus, and your staff. Do not think that you can cut staff at your law school and solve the problem. Because if the school is weak on staff, the students are going to notice, and it's not going to be a viable environment for them to learn. They need a registrar. They need someone to help with financial aid. They need someone to help them with their career services. So you can't cut staff. Student services have to be maintained. There are continuous building costs. This carpet, these fancy desks, the swivelly parts of the chairs, all sorts of things have to be maintained. Go around and count the light bulbs in your building sometime. I doubt any of us would want to work in a Costco-like environment where the lights dim on sunny days. Because, oh, there's light coming in. Okay. So, low enrollment has given us lemons. This is an image from CALI's collection of images, by the way. We have 450 images on flickr.com/CALI order for you to use. So what do you do with lemons? We all know what we do with lemons. We make lemonade, or in my case, a slice of lemon in ice water. This was the first image I found. So let's make lemonade. A lot of schools are coming up with alternatives for the low employment numbers. They're doing some sort of incubator experience. And there are just a number of articles out there. Whoops. Whoops. It's a very touchy button. Everyone's got an incubator going on for their graduate students. Well, how about also offering up an LL.M for your students? It gives those who have low employment numbers some additional experience. It allows for students who have been out for a while, maybe took time off for family, to retool their expertise. Notice how many LL.Ms have a specialty area: health, tax, family, entertainment. These are the ones that I have found the most of. Your faculty might be underutilized. If you have faculty staring into space with big lofty thoughts, don't you want to put them to work? When you offer a local LL.M, here is the limiting factor to your LL.M program. Students have to move to your city. They have to live nearby. If you go global, this is who your market is. This is who your students are. They are anywhere. Now you have to be prepared to support these students anywhere. You have to be really nice to your IT people. When a student calls in from Japan, whatever the time difference is, it's got to be hideous. You need someone there to help that student. So here's some reasons I think schools should be moving online. It opens up a broader student body applicant pool. Think of the bus. It adds diversity to your school. And I'm talking diversity here at a very large level. International diversity, experience diversity, different lands in terms of, is it a civil country or a common law country? It avoids crowding of the physical space. It broadens your alumni base. Did I just hear money mentioned again? It gives your students more contacts for job possibilities. How many of you belong to an alumni association for your school that might be in a different state than where you live, and you're constantly being told about local events for your alumni group and being asked to mentor students for jobs? Why not have in our global environment people who actually know about your school in a different country who can talk to your students about jobs? It diversifies your donation pool, and then finally it expands the reach of your school brand, which is at some level important to all of us. So we don't have very much time left. I did move through a lot of this very quickly, and I hope that we can talk about this more. I'd like to open it up to questions here or comments from any of you who are teaching programs. What have you experienced?
How about blending local students with distant students in one class? Do you have any thoughts or questions on that?
Okay, the question is, how about blending students at a local campus and school with students at a different campus or school?
Yeah, and it's the internship example for us.
Right, exactly. Actually, I know, Larry, you've done that. You teach at 2 schools, right?
Actually, my colleague does.
Hold on.
Teaches at 3 schools.
Hold on. I'm going to give you my, I'm not going to go far from you, though.
Okay, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I have a colleague that teaches at 3 different schools simultaneously.
And how does that work for you?
Works
Yeah.
Her. Yeah.
Her.
Yeah, works well for her. She simply works online with every class and has a good sense of how to relate to the students. It's all synchronous video.
I know Peter Martin at Cornell used to do that also. And students, I think in that instance, were more asynchronous. Other questions? Oh, hi, Norm.
Hi. You speak of the use of video for the distance portion, as though it's a talking head type of video. And I've been using narrated PowerPoints, and our LL.M program online does the same. Why do you think your emphasis is on video in that format rather than narrated PowerPoints? And narrated PowerPoints are delivered online in video format.
Right, okay. The question statement was, so I talk a lot about a talking head video. Yes, that's true. And why do I do that when I'm well aware that there are fabulous people out there who are doing PowerPoint slides with narration as a large form of delivery? Okay, is that sort of, okay,
That's exactly.
That's it, thank you. So I talk about the talking head for video sort of as the darkest example, because I have actually talked with people who said, well, we recorded everything, and now we have the video of the professor, and now we're going to put it up, and we are teaching distance education. And I don't think it's effective. I have trouble watching it. I assume I'm not alone in this. And my real problem is not the fact that I can't watch it, but it doesn't engage me, because I want the video to be stopped. I want to be encouraged in your PowerPoint slide, and I haven't watched any lately, so I don't mean to pick on you, but I want to be encouraged to stop and think about a question and then come forward and move forward with the answer. I want to be engaged in the material, and I think the dark idea of just recording the professor and playing that to your students and calling that a course is just not effective. It lacks a lot of things that we do in the classroom or should be doing in the classroom. So that's why I sort of pull it up as the far end of the dark continuum.
I actually...
You're on the light side.
Yeah, okay. Well, I actually think that one of the main things I got out of your presentation this morning is the stopping during, I'm recreating my narrated PowerPoints this summer, and I'm going to put a lot of stop pauses in there and do something. I just was at the Washburn Flipping the Classroom conference, which was last week, and the gal did a presentation, a female person, pardon me, who actually in her 3-minute video did a pause and do something. And I don't know why, but it never occurred to me before, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. So Norm, just for the recording purposes, Norm said that his takeaway from this morning is to pause the video. He's going to be redoing some of his coursework, and he's going to do that. And he was just in Topeka at Washburn at a conference on flipping the classroom, and one of the speakers there suggested that exact same idea, and he'd never thought of it before, but is a convert. I'm labeling you a convert now.
Yes, I am.
I don't think a lot of us think about it, because we're used to watching video from start to finish.
Right.
In the way back.
Something head type video versus an actual classroom being videotaped. And, students consuming that and it's sort of like
Do I see a difference between a talking head video and a video where a classroom is being recorded, and are there differences in what do I think and things like that? Right.
Are there differences in how students who watch both those formats, like how they respond to the video?
Right. I don't know of any studies myself that have looked at that. When you are recording the entire class, it becomes more complicated. It's probably easier for the faculty member because they have a live audience and they can gauge things. But the minute you have students speaking, you need to think about whether they're going to be audible on your recording. And we come back to those issues of ownership and can I now beam my students around the galaxy and things like that. I'm sure that somebody has studied that at the higher ed level in college. A lot more folks are doing this because the number of students who are taking courses online in higher ed before law school is just stunning. Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I just actually want to make a comment, and if everybody realizes this, I apologize. But we were talking about the ABA rules. Certain states have their own very specific rules for what counts as credit or will be provided as credit. And in fact, if your students are ever considering taking the New York bar, no credit for asynchronous classes. The discussion or the requirements of what distance learning has to have are very specific in detail. And students at your school would not be allowed to sit for the New York bar if they had credits in certain kinds of classes.
Wow, okay, this just in. For those of us who don't know this yet, states also have requirements, and the point's been brought up that New York has a very tight limit. No asynchronous, no credit for asynchronous online courses counts toward the JD. So if your student wanders into the state to take the bar and has an asynchronous course on their transcript,
Depending on the number of credits.
depending on the number of credits,
Right.
right, it could be a problem for them. So consider state things also. In the way back.
Referring to instructional methods.
I'm sorry, what was the start?
When you're dealing with instructional methods, if you're doing multiple types of formats, like if you're doing video, or if you're doing email thread, and then you're doing assignments, and let's say that instructional methods matter in a particular situation, which they often do in the GED program, maybe not in the LL.M program. How do you count basically instructional minutes being, like maybe there's an email thread? Can we count minutes? And I guess because I apologize. Anyway, I mean, how do we take that, the need for instructional minutes, and calculate in a distance program what is instruction and how do you actually count it?
That's a really good question. So the question is, instructional minutes are required by ABA standard. Yeah, and so how do you count the different elements of an online course against those instructional minutes? The example was pitched out of threaded email, for example. I think if we're going to use like a talking PowerPoint sort of thing, that's an easy to measure minute. So let's sort of take a running start into this question. You can sort of time and say that's how long this lasts. If the threaded email might be a very difficult thing to measure, and how does that differ from threaded email in a traditional class? You don't really count that now. But if you're having some sort of a synchronous event with your students by live chat or Google Hangout, we can measure and document those times. So maybe I'm not going to be able to count every single minute that students are thinking about or exchanging information on a course, just as I can't now measure it. I doubt if I could teach a 3-credit class in 2 hours of time and say, oh, but they really, really spend a lot of time emailing me. So I think that's what I would sort of look to. Not all technologies are going to fit in the ABA standards.
There, just as a kind of a response to the New York issue, there are even some synchronous classes that New York has issued.
Yes.
Oh.
the very idea of distance delivery that they have a problem.
Okay, our New York issue continues as a problem. Synchronous might be a problem also. Yes?
Just to let people know, if you're following the Twitter stream, I just posted a link to the New York Board of Bar Executive Rules, and in paragraph 6 of the rules talk about distance learning and what may and may not be done.
Oh, fantastic. By the time you're hearing this, months ago, it's been posted to Twitter, the actual rules for New York so that you can read them and enjoy them for yourself. Yes?
As a follow-up to what I was talking about, I forgot to mention, one of the things that this person at
At Washburn, yep.
demonstrated was an animated video. And I was trying to find the name of
There's a really cool program out there called Extra Normal.
that was one of them.
It's the letter X.
Yes, she
Extra
had a
Normal.
different one that was just.
Oh, there are probably a lot out there. I've seen some amazing things in Extra Normal where it looks like people are really talking.
Yeah.
So, this is I don't want to keep everyone too long. It's now lunchtime. I want to thank you very much for your time, ideas, and attention. And please, let's continue this conversation over the next 2.5 days and into the coming months. Thank you. Yeah, let me turn off the light. Although the room might still be loud.